I'm Leslye Colvin from Alabama, USA, and I'm in Rome for the Catholic Women Speak Symposium. I work for a Catholic nonprofit, and I was invited to Rome to speak on my experience as an African American Catholic woman who is a native of Alabama and has lived most of my life in the Deep South. 3 generations of my family entered the Catholic Church during the 1960s when Alabama was a very segregated place, more so than it is today. And the priest who accompanied my grandparents and aunt into the church was Irish. He had been ordained in 1954. His first assignment was in Montgomery, Alabama. He arrived 1 year before Dr. Martin Luther King. And Father Marr told me personally that it was through this assignment that he came to know and love African Americans. It was the only assignment he had during his long life as a priest that he cried when he left the assignment. Many years later, when my grandfather passed, at the burial site, he identified my grandfather as the freest man he'd ever known. And those are the only words from my grandfather's funeral that I remember. I remember wondering, what was it about my grandfather that this Irish priest saw as being free? He had been orphaned at a very young age. He was born in 1905, Alabama, which I cannot imagine how many obstacles he faced as a child, as a young man. Yet there was something in him that Father Marr identified as having been very free. And I think that that freedom was a gift of spirit, a gift of the Spirit. And that same Spirit is what led my family into the church. So while segregation, racial segregation, was the status quo for my community, my city, the state, my region, when I was a young child, whenever I saw news coverage of events from the Vatican, it was always exciting because I saw a diverse group of people gathered that were worshiping together. And whereas we had many churches of other denominations in my hometown, they were all racially segregated. And our parish embraced us and welcomed us. So it provided a microcosm view of what I recognized as my global faith community. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I recognized my introduction to the church, the Catholic Church, as having been an introduction into the church's social teachings, the gospel of Christ, what I now identify as the heart of the gospel. Jesus always opening his arms to embrace and encounter others. That's what my church is to be. I know that in my heart. And that I pray that my church continues to move forward on, becoming inclusive and more open so that everyone knows that the arms of Christ are open to embrace them where they are. As a Christian in the South, I'm part of a majority. However, as a Catholic in my hometown and as an African American Catholic, I'm part of what I consider to be a double minority. And as a woman then, I often feel that I'm a triple minority within my church. And when I study scripture, when I study the life of the man Jesus, who walked the earth. I hear his invitation. I hear his invitation through his questions. He wasn't constantly saying that life is black or white, but he asked questions that recognized nuance and accepted the questions that people had and allowed them to take the questions and internalize them, to process them. I love the story of the rich man that he invited to sell all he had to follow him, and he didn't. But I always wonder what happened the next day, the next month, the next year. You know, Jesus didn't close the door. And as an African American woman in the church, I want to know that the door is open not only for me, but for all of my sisters and brothers.